This is Robbie McKenzie. This is Youth Ministry 63, 6.3, which stands for Nehemiah 6:3. I'm doing a great work, and I cannot come down. I have with me Dr. Professor Mrs. Kenda Creasy Dean. She is a professor at Princeton Theological Seminary. She's written numerous books, and she's a super amazing person. And I'm honored just to be able to interview her. Just real quickly, we're going to talk about her book, her recent book, Almost Christian. And just real quickly, not real quickly, but just to get you talking and not me. Maybe some of our audience hasn't really read the book or been aware of this idea of moral therapeutic deism. Can you kind of just introduce that and talk about that a little bit? What does that have to do with youth ministry? And just kind of introduce that for us, if you don't mind.
Yeah, well, moralistic therapeutic deism, which is a $10 phrase for a very simple idea, actually, is the term that the National Study of Youth and Religion used to describe the kind of banal, low-level, low-commitment, go-along-with-it kind of faith that is what they believe is the dominant form of religion in the United States, not just among Christians. But Christian kids were very much espousing this as their primary religious belief. And what that, to sum it up, it means that religion helps you do good, it's moralistic, helps you feel good, it's therapeutic, and otherwise God stays out of the way. Deist, in the background, in the wallpaper. And this was the feel good, do good, God is kind of optional view of religion that was common, and it was pervasive among Christian teenagers.
That's correct. So, and that's what was, my brain's just fried right now. What was the major study that came about from?
No, not a problem. It was the National Study of Youth and Religion.
Okay, and that was that 2004 to 2006, or did I get the dates wrong?
It started in 2003, and it's actually ongoing.
Okay, that's right.
There's a longitudinal dimension to it. So the data that I worked with was from the first wave. Which looked at kids between the ages of 13 and 17.
Absolutely.
And then there are several books that are out based on this research now, and some of them are very targeted, like there's a book that just came out by one of the researchers, Mark Regnerus, on premarital sex. They just looked at that dynamic of the survey. But the one that look at the religious trends are Soul Searching by Christian Smith, A Faith of Their Own, which looks at how faith changes between the ages of 16 and 18,
right.
By Lisa Pierce and Melinda Denton, and Souls in Transition by Christian Smith.
That's correct.
And then I was the person brought on to interpret all that for churches. As if it's possible.
Absolutely, absolutely. And as a youth minister, as I was reading the book and as I was wrestling with it and almost in dialogue with it, one of the things that struck me and some of my buddies as we kind of engaged the book together was this idea of, we have the results here of the moralistic therapeutic deism, and our students are just not getting it. And part of the reason may be some of us and part of the parents and so on and so forth. But how do you, when it comes to teaching, find balance in teaching students? Like for example, if we do all practical stuff like the roller coaster ride, all that stuff that youth ministry, if we do all that stuff, we run the tendency of that moralistic therapeutic deism. But if we get too hard-nosed, like class is almost like a seminary almost, if we get that, it sometimes turns students off. And so how do we find a balance in how we teach our students? Well,
that's the $1,000,000 question, right?
Yeah.
And for me, I think part of what, two things. Partly it's remembering things that we already know as youth pastors, right? That it's not about that a lot of formation takes place in participation.
Absolutely.
So it's not about telling kids what they need to do in the future as people in the church. It's not about even telling them what Christians do. It's inviting them into life alongside of adults who are Christians. Of course, that works fine as long as the adults are up for it, right? If the adults aren't doing it either, then you got a problem.
Absolutely.
And the other thing is, and I talk a little bit about this in the book, I do think that we have kind of inverted the way we think about teaching faith in terms of, we think if we teach them about Jesus, they will love Jesus.
Sure.
Truth of the matter is, I think it works the other way around.
Absolutely.
You know, you learn what you love, right? So the emphasis probably needs to be more on exemplifying with teenagers what Christian love looks like, and letting them catch a sense of what it means to be loved unconditionally and challenged, not because you're trying to make things hard for them, but because you love them.
Absolutely.
And anybody who's been a parent knows that if you love somebody, you don't leave them alone.
Absolutely.
You know?
Absolutely.
So anyway, so part of it is inverting the way we think about teaching, so that we lead with love rather than expertise. And part of it is in remembering that formation happens not through information, but through participation.
Absolutely.
So it's not a magic bullet.
No.
You know, there isn't a magic bullet that I've been able to find. So if you know one, I'm listening.
Yeah. I mean, we, as youth ministers, you're often searching for like the magic curriculum, the magic activity,
Right.
the magic discipleship program, and you're right. It's never going to work out that way.
It has, I mean, one of the reasons why the missional church conversation, I kind of hate that term, because number one, it's redundant, and number two, it's so overused right now that it doesn't have any meaning. But the idea of, you know, mission is so captivating is because, you know, as long as it's primarily about us, we narrow what we are about to the point of real artificiality, I think. Kids know that immediately.
Absolutely.
You know, so they're looking for ways. The hard question is not what do you know about Christian faith, but how do you live it out in a world that challenges it at every turn. You know,
interesting.
How can I be, you know, 100% who I say I am? I think that's a real honest question for kids as they encounter this. You know, if it's just an intellectual category, who cares?
And speaking of kids encountering, what do you think that kids, I say kids, but I mean students, what are they searching for in youth ministry that they can hold on to, that's genuine and authentic? What do you think they're searching for in youth ministries?
Well, I suspect the reason I'm hesitating is because I'm not so sure that what they're looking for in youth ministry is different from what they're looking for in all of their lives.
Sure.
Right? And the most profound human need, my view of teenagers is that they're just human beings,
right. but
they're unfiltered human beings.
Absolutely.
Right? They haven't learned to screen out a lot of the things that we learn you ought to screen out for polite company.
Absolutely.
And you know, they're looking for somebody who will love them as who they really are.
Absolutely.
They want to be known. They want to be loved. They want to be challenged because of if somebody sees potential in you, you know, they're going to leave you alone. They're going to challenge you to something. That's affirming for young people because people will believe in them. Well, they look for that throughout every part of their life, and it seems to me that the church is uniquely equipped to offer them that kind of response. You know, that this is the way God wants to love us, right?
Absolutely.
And we're supposed to show people what that looks like.
Absolutely.
And if the church does not offer them that kind of intense belonging and challenge and acceptance, those kinds of things, then they're going to look for it someplace else because it's a human need.
Yep.
We all have to have that, and we will keep looking until we find it.
Absolutely.
And I think that a lot of kids are it's been so long since churches have really provided that for a lot of people. They don't even think that the church is someplace they would ever look for that.
Right.
You know? And I think that has to do with our misread of who we're called to be.
Yep.
You know?
Absolutely. You in Almost Christian, you have a section there where you talk about, and I'm summarizing this, but you talk about, how do you know that students are getting it? And what I mean by getting it is these students are engaged in discipleship, they're engaged in this, and so for a youth minister, how do we know that we're doing the right things, that we're not just in youth ministry, but holistically what you're talking about, church? how are we, when kids graduate high school and go on, what are some things that we know that, hey, this is not moralistic therapeutic deism, this is what they're called to be? What are some sort of signifiers, signs, whatever that you would say? Just go ahead. What do you think about that?
Well, I mean, first of all, in a real sense, we often don't know. People in youth ministry sow a lot of seeds they never see grow to fruition, right?
Sure.
Doesn't mean the seed is not germinating.
Right.
It means that somebody else may be the farmer along the way that brings it to maturity. But a number of things that the National Study of Youth and Religion found in highly devoted teenagers might serve as markers for us. For example, the ability to talk about your faith, the ability to put language to it. Tom Long talks about the need to talk ourselves into being Christian. If you can't talk about your faith, it has very little hold on you. We literally as human beings talk things into existence and significance. And so, one thing that we've been really lax on, especially in mainline Protestant churches and Catholic churches, is where this really showed up, is helping kids do more than just believe. They have to articulate what it is that matters to them. Otherwise, it doesn't matter very much. So that's one thing. Another thing is participation with, I think of it as others, right?
Right.
Not just me and you,
Sure.
and not just me and people who need to be served, but participation with God. God is an other too.
Absolutely.
So prayer and mission really go hand in hand. And creating spaces where that kind of messy, mysterious kind of encounter is possible. It's really hard to do that in a consumer-driven, busy world. One of my doctoral students right now is Nate Stuckey is doing his doctoral research on the importance of Sabbath for youth ministry. For exactly this reason. It's Sabbath that the encounter with God, is appropriated. And the other thing is probably parents are a key to whether, are parents engaged in active ways? Are they engaged in faith? That's not 100%, of course. There are lots of religious parents whose kids are not religious and vice versa.
Sure.
But the data says that you are far more likely to instill faith in teenagers that will make the transition between high school and college if parents are active in their own religious communities while teenagers are in high school.
Absolutely.
So that's what comes to mind off the top of my head. You can probably think of others.
No, that's super. Just a last few questions just to ask. How can youth ministers prepare themselves for ministry in the 21st century? I mean, what do we need to do? And I'm not just talking about fresh out of college, fresh out of seminary. I'm talking about youth ministers who've been in it for a while, youth ministers who are just now getting into it. What do we need to do to prepare ourselves for ministry in the context that we're in now?
Yeah, I don't want to sound really simplistic about this, but we kind of need to do youth ministry with ourselves too, right?
Absolutely.
We need places where we need to invest in our own formation, faith formation, and spiritual maturity. We need places where we practice articulating faith. I mean, I'm a Methodist, right? So corporate discipleship is a big deal for me.
Right.
But it's true. I mean,
Absolutely.
Because I'm in conversation with other people about faith, gives me a language that I can then carry into my ministry or into other parts of my life. You need a few people who get it. We're told by, I think the research was done at Duke, that the most significant thing that keeps you in ministry is what they call vocational friendships. And what that means is these are people who get it. Right. If you say I'm called to youth ministry, this is somebody else who gets it.
Right.
And these are people who tend to travel with us along the way for a long time. So find those vocational friendships and invest in them. I'm a big, this won't surprise you, but I'm a big believer that if all we educate ourselves about are the strategies, of youth ministry, the games, the trips, all of that kind of stuff, we are going to be hollow very quickly.
Absolutely.
And unless we really go into our own, theological world in a significant way, in conversation with other people,
Absolutely.
I think we forget why we do this.
Sure.
So it doesn't hurt to give yourself a discipline of getting into the scriptures when you're not even teaching them.
Absolutely. Absolutely. If you had, and I know this is, when I asked Andy Root about this was almost too simplistic for him. I asked, if you had 3 books to recommend to a youth minister, and that kind of caught him. He's like, 3 books. He said, of course, he recommended 4. So, but if you had 3 books that you would recommend to a youth minister right now, and I know it depends on the context, but if you just 3 books right at the top of your head, what would those books be? Of course, other than books by Kenda Creasy Dean,
right.
of course,
Absolutely,
right?
Yeah. Well, the books that change that are books that change me are not necessarily youth ministry books.
Sure.
I'm assuming the Bible is already part
Absolutely.
of the 3, right?
You can't cheat and use the
Can't,
Bible.
right. No, I know. I am the things that have fed me spiritually. The things that have fed me many, many times are the writings of Eugene Peterson and Anne Lamott. 2 very different people, but they have hit you between the eyes kind of reality about them that always kind of wakes me up. But 2 other books that have really impacted me are, one is an old book, and you have to get past the fact that it's dated because there's a lot of assumptions that have changed. A book called Shantung Compound by a guy who became a Christian ethicist named Lawrence Gilkey. And it's about his being incarcerated during World War I, I think it was, in China, and about how they formed a community within this compound to help each other survive. I find this hugely instructional for people who are trying to create communities in ministry. And I tried assigning it once in a class. I have to say my students did not share my enthusiasm for it, so I take that experience. But it was really formative for me.
Sure.
And the other one is a book by an economist named Jeffrey Sachs called The End of Poverty. Sachs has found what he thinks is the solution to desperate poverty, which basically involves investing in 5 or 6 systems in a village for, $300,000 or $300,000. The time I read this, we were applying for a grant for $300,000 for educational purposes, and I'm like, wait a minute, why do we do what we do?
Sure.
So there are a range of things that have changed me. I don't know whether they will change anybody else or not. At the moment, my Lenten discipline is working through a book on the Ignatian prayer of Examen, which is actually in the book. I've used it before, but my spiritual director thought it might be good for me to get back to it. So that's what I'm doing right now.
That's great. Last question, and you kind of answered it really in a way earlier at another question, but if, say, I was a new youth minister, what bit of advice would you give me? It's my first job, it's my first ministry. Yeah. I'm really wet behind the ears. I'm green as they come, as they say down here. What bit of advice would you give for me?
Well, I would tell you what I tell my classes before they go off and start interviewing. And this is actually before, I'm going to assume you haven't gotten the job yet.
Right.
The first thing you look for is a secure senior pastor.
Absolutely.
Somebody who will not be threatened by your mistakes or your success. If you smell anything different, run away. Yeah. Because somebody who is secure in their own call to ministry is a hugely valuable mentor, a hugely valuable example, and also will not own your stuff. You get to sink or swim on your own pastoral merits there.
Absolutely.
Then, for me, the first year is all about getting to know people. I think, spending a lot of time, having lunch with parents, with kids, with youth volunteers, visiting them at their events, going to their schools, wherever, there's safe ways to do that, and wherever you can, get to know them. That and serving the poor will get you a long way in your first year. The third thing I would say is be visible in worship. You are a leader in the worshiping community, and when you preach, a lot of youth pastors don't want to preach, and I always urge them to try to get in a position where they can do that, because you are pastoring parents and grandparents and aunts and uncles who are the primary youth ministers for their children. We're secondary. So be a worship leader.
That's awesome. Thank you.
Keep you off the streets for the first year.
Yeah, keep you fed for the first year. Yeah. That's good. This is Youth Ministry 63. Kenda, please hold on. Thank you so much for being with us. This is lesson number 11 with Kenda Creasy Dean. And you can read her book, Almost Christian. Please buy it. Buy many copies. You'll make Kenda happy, and it'll change your life. Thank you so much. Kenda,